Welcome back to Cool Comics, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to talk about, can DC and Marvel be great again? Well, the answer is absolutely, but as we all know, the state of DC and Marvel is very pathetic, to the point where both Warner Brothers and Disney, there have been rumors floating around about them selling the comics divisions and potentially just licensing them out to other publishers, which could both help or hurt depending on your perspective, although it's going to be really hard because these corporations have been around for years. They're legacy franchises at this point. And I just want to see these companies make good hero content again, and even non-hero content. And I believe that there's somebody capable of making good comics within these companies. It's just they won't hire those people. They're too busy hiring the people who are too concerned about ideology and too concerned about race and gender and sexuality. And that's what they've tried to make all of these heroes into collectively, and they were never about that before throughout their various ages, and it's caused readers to just go, yeah, nope, I'm done. Comics are already as expensive as it is. Here's a perfect excuse to get out of them. You know, and comic book shops are failing. The digital comics front are failing. Amazon used to have Comixology. They completely closed it down, and I guess now they just sell comics regularly through whatever store, but they used to have a dedicated comics app. Now they don't anymore. You know, they're not getting enough people subscribing to that sort of thing. DC and Marvel's apps aren't doing too good, you know? Because I think they thought in the digital age, well, why not just have people read comics digitally? That helps with distribution, all of that sort of thing. It's not really helping. I mean, I do like digital comics for the sake of saving space, but, you know, there's issues with digital comics. There's some... You can't really get the experience by just reading a digital thing. You gotta read a physical comic in some cases, especially if it's a good comic. You know, you gotta have it in your hands. You gotta see the artwork on the page as it's printed, and, you know, that sort of thing. And ultimately, you don't get that with a digital book. I mean, you can get some pretty high quality and clarity stuff, but it's not quite the same. And I'm not here to knock digital comics. It's just, you know, sometimes you just want a physical book. But if you've got space issues, I understand it. I completely understand it. But as far as the state of the comic book industry, mainstream comics are doing terrible. Everybody is saying it. There are people who are denying it, people who work in it who are denying it, but also people who are working in it are complaining about it. They're complaining about the way the industry treats them, and yet they're still doing it, even though many of them don't care about the heroes that they're writing about or illustrating. They just don't. But they're using it as a vehicle to get their name out there, and it's just... I don't know. I think these industries would do a lot better if they had people who actually respected their characters and were willing to put in the work and sacrifice to do so and not go complain on Twitter. I think that would work out a whole lot better. The whole Comicsgate fiasco just absolutely tore things apart. It got rid of so many people who were doing good for Marvel and DC, and it just... They never recovered from it. Meanwhile, the people who went on to do independent comics in that whole thing, the guys like Ethan Van Sciver and the Rippaverse, and he was a little later than that whole fiasco, but the people who are producing independent comics are doing great because they've been honest about what the characters are about, what the stories are about. People expressed interest, they helped crowdfund them, and they got them. You know, people who know comic books want to support industry legends who know what they're doing and who understand characterizations, they understand the art, they understand how to write. They want to support those things. You know, when Ethan Van Sciver announced Cyberfrog, he was basically relaunching an old series he had started. People were all over it, and from what I've heard, those books are great. I haven't gotten a chance to read them myself, but hopefully sometime in the near future I'll be able to get my hands on a copy or two, and just... Because I know there's, 3 volumes? There's about to be 3. They just launched the campaign, I think, for the 3rd one. So I'm just happy to see him doing good, because he does. He has fantastic and very unique art to himself. I think he's got a great understanding of comics. He's a fan of comics. He's doing a series now where he's reviewing bad comics, which is greatly entertaining. I really like that. But people get behind creators they support who understand the characters. There are too many people using it as a vehicle for ideology, for gender, for sexuality, for race, and for political, social issues, particularly woke issues. That's never been what comics are about. Longtime comic book readers know this, and they're the only ones left supporting the industry because they're not really getting new readers. They're really not. Instead of getting a nice run on Superman, equivalent to something like All-Star Superman or Superman Red, we're getting Superman's gay son. How many people does that have a massive appeal to? Only a handful. That doesn't sell. That's a targeted demographic book. Instead of getting an amazing Batman run like Nightfall or Hush or any of those, we're getting Gotham High. Instead of getting a great Teen Titans series, we're getting I Am Not Starfire, which is just... How did that book even get approved? That's been what we... It's worse than Hollywood. It's worse than the woke state of Hollywood. It's worse than what's going on in parts of gaming. It's just terrible. Even if people are interested in comics, they start with new stuff, and not only are they lost, but they're seeing culture war stuff. And if they're not in line with the writers who are writing this, if they're not woke, then they're going, wait a second, what is this? I wanted to see heroics, not politics. And it's terrible. And of course you get people who still try to defend it, even though the industry's a sinking ship and it's a waste of time for them to do so. People just want neutrality in media, and I've said this in multiples of my videos. People just want to go back to the way things were, and there are people determined not to let that happen, who are in charge of these things, and they're bleeding these companies money. I don't understand why these companies don't just, I don't understand why they just don't get rid of these people who aren't producing money. That's how it used to be. What kind of leverage do these people have to where they can continue to lose money for these companies and not be fired? I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me, because people want to pass comics down to their kids and get them excited about it, but they can only do that now with independent comics, because independent comics are doing the types of stories they want to read and the type of art that they want to look at and that sort of thing. It's appalling, the state of modern comics. It's really jarring how bad it is. When DC is doing more for Pride Month than they are for, say, the 4th of July or anything else, I mean, what does that tell you? They're catering to a small demographic of people that has proven by the numbers to not be profitable. And they're not rushing out to buy these books. These books don't sell. And yet they're still around, and comic book shops have to deal with the back inventory, and they end up suffering. So yes, DC and Marvel can be great again, but it's going to take several things. The first thing it's going to take is being faithful to how these characters have been represented and not trying to change them in significant ways. The second way is writing compelling stories that aren't necessarily analogs for the real world at every opportunity. There needs to be more fantasy than analog to reality. Okay? We don't need Wonder Woman fighting Trump. That's a thing that apparently either came out or is coming out. She's fighting an analog for Donald Trump, and it's just, that takes readers out of your story. They don't want to hear that, whether they love or hate Trump. Who cares? Why do we need to hear that in Wonder Woman? Why can't she fight somebody original for a change? That's just stupid. It's incredibly dumb. So no more of that. Get rid of that. They want good and consistently good art, which I know is expensive, but you've got several legendary artists who are still making their own books. Just bring them on to do a series or two and pay them well for it. If they've proven themselves, if you bring back Ethan Van Sciver to do a Flash run, I know several people who would go out and buy that in a heartbeat. Are you kidding me? If he and Jeff Johns or whoever did a Flash run again, oh my gosh. It's so obvious, but they won't do that. Number one, because they've kicked him out of the company, but number two, because they just don't want to. They want to do it their way, and their way isn't profitable, but they don't care. They don't care that it's not profitable. And I think the third thing that they can do is really start promoting their books better. They don't really do much promotional work. You have to go to their channels and their social medias to find that, but people who don't care, they don't care. They're trusting that people watch the movies and then they go to the comics. I think Jim Lee was saying that with James Gunn coming into DC, he was going to be like the savior of DC, and I'm like, look, I respect Jim Lee, but what kind of a take is that? He had one good set of movies at Marvel, but he said, oh, he understands the characters, this, that, and the other. I'm like, the problem is he's still going to give in to political pressure. There's still a DEI department at Warner Brothers. We're still going to get woke versions of these characters that people have expressed they're tired of. So no, I don't trust James Gunn. I don't think he can fix it. Everybody's like, yeah, he'll fix it. He had Guardians of the Galaxy. If he makes everything Guardians of the Galaxy, then DC is just going to do terribly. He has to prove himself still, yes, but I don't have any faith, because DC has just been failure after failure. Live action, their only successful live action stuff, the most recent was Joker, and then before that, it was the Dark Knight trilogy. And then before that, it was the Batman movies, and then before that, it was the Superman movies, where it kind of started. But it's just been nothing good new. And those never, I don't know about back in the day with Batman and Superman, but in the modern day, those don't translate to comic sales. People aren't rushing to the comic book store to buy Batman books and Superman books after they go and see Batman and Superman movies. Nobody was doing that with the Flash movie. They just knew him from the TV show, or from the Justice League animated series, which is what I grew up with. They don't care about the comics, which is sad, but it's true. The movie stuff does not translate to comic sales. It just doesn't. There's no... I have yet to see any metrics that demonstrate that. People would rather just watch the movies. It's like book adaptions. You know, how many people who watch The Hunger Games... I mean, The Hunger Games was sort of the reverse situation where the books were doing well, and then they spawned the movie. But in the case of comic books, it's the movies do well, and then nothing happens with the books. It wasn't that the books were already selling well. It was that the movies were doing well. The only case of this in comics I've seen is Civil War, where the Civil War book was fantastic, but the movie was just piggybacking off of that storyline with its already established thing going on. And it was completely different from the Civil War book, which I think is probably better, in my personal opinion. But that's neither here nor there. That's just opinions. But there's so many things that these companies can do, and Marvel is a lot worse than DC, but they're both doing the same things. They've both got terrible books, they've got terrible writing and artists, and they're all on Twitter complaining all hours of the day, and there was that whole comics broke me hashtag. That was a trip. What happened to the industry? What happened to the people who were passionate about the heroes? Who understood the heroes, who wanted to be faithful to past adaptations of the heroes? They don't seem to be there anymore. They don't hire those people anymore. They just hire ideologues and say, here's a job. You know how to draw and to basically write. Here you go. I could probably work for one of these companies. I could probably write some of these stories. They won't hire me. But they're going to reap what they sow, and they're already losing hand over fist to the point where, again, both companies, there's rumors going around that they could sell the comic divisions and just distribute. They could just license them out to other publishers. So if that ever happens, that's going to be a very sad day, because some of these companies have been around for a very long time. So you're basically killing an American institution. And they're not learning anything from indie comics. They're just trashing the indie comic creators. They're just attacking them all the time, even though they're doing great. And that's just jealousy. It's sort of a teenage, childish jealousy that they're extending to guys like Ethan Van Sciver and Eric July and is Chuck Dixon making a book? I don't know. There's a lot of different guys making books. A lot of legacy creators and indie creators, and a lot of them are doing well because they're just going back to the old school way of making comics, and that's not what these new industry people want. They want ideology, and they're very rabid, and they treat a lot of these indie creators horribly, and DC and Marvel let them get away with that on Twitter. They shouldn't. If I was in charge of DC or Marvel right now, I would get everybody together, whether they could be there on a Zoom call, and I'd say, I want to make something abundantly clear. We're not going to engage in attack campaigns on Twitter. We're not going to engage in a war against independent creators or political battles. We're going to make good books, and that's going to be the end of it. We're not going to focus on ideology. You check that at the door. You can have whatever you want at your little cubicle, but we're not going to focus on any of that. We're going to give our customers exactly what they want. We're going to give them good characters, good stories, good art, and we're going to devote ourselves to that. And if we can't devote ourselves to that, then some of you are going to be out of here by next week. Some of you are going to be leaving with cardboard boxes. But that's just the bottom line of it. That's what I would do. But nobody at these leaderships does this. I'm surprised that Jeff Johns and Jim Lee don't do anything. I'm really surprised at that. These are industry veterans. These are big names. And they practically run DC. And they're not running it very well. To be honest with you, they're not running it very well. And like I said, Jim Lee had the take that, James Gunn's going to save us. And I doubt it. I really do. I don't know where that came from. I feel like Jim Lee's a lot smarter than that. But maybe he, people are thinking, well, maybe he knows something we don't. I don't know. So many people are in denial about the state of comics. It's very hard to say one way or the other. So I don't know what his mentality is. All I know is if they don't take those steps I mentioned and that several others have mentioned throughout the years, they're going to lose these companies. We're basically watching these companies die in real time. And their movie divisions being the only thing that's left with any sort of, profitability. Or their with DC, like their direct animated features. That's what they should be putting their time and effort into, because those are still pretty good from what I've seen. They released a new Justice League one. I don't know if it's good or bad. I haven't seen it, but the past direct-to-video animated features they've released have been phenomenal. That's the best medium for comics in terms of motion on screen, is animation. It's the most logical translation from the page. It just makes sense. It's comics in motion, without speech bubbles and with voice acting, and you can portray the action in ways that would be way more expensive to do with CG. It's great, but they don't Marvel doesn't lean into it especially, but DC's the master of it. Ever since Batman the Animated Series, and even earlier, they've been masters of animation, so they need to lean into that aspect, but they don't. And whenever they try, you get My Adventures with Superman, and I've already talked about that. I did a Toonie talk about it. But anyways, yes, Marvel and DC can be great again, but we'll all have to wait to see if that ends up happening and how they would restructure, because they need to. They absolutely need to. Some people need to be fired at those companies. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV with another edition of Cool Comics. In the next edition, I will do another graphic novel review. Thank you very much. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.